Hello and welcome to a special edition of the Addicted to Cars podcast. And as you can see with me today is Bernie Quinn. If you are a regular viewer, you'll recognise Bernie from our recent FPV episode, and that's because he's got decades of experience in the Australian car industry in all sorts of engineering and manufacturing roles. We're here today at Premcar, where he is the CEO. They obviously run the Nissan Warrior program and the Triton Raider programs. But today, we're going to talk about, is it possible to recreate car manufacturing in Australia? Bernie has kind of become the unofficial and unintended spokesperson for this.
Everyone else step back. Yeah.
But equally, I think with his background, obviously with Ford, with ProDrive, now with Premcar, there's a lot to talk about. And while there are news stories out there where there's been snippets and quotes here and there, I think this will maybe give an opportunity to have a bit more of an in-depth chat and have some real context and depth to the discussion, hopefully.
Thanks, Scott.
So I guess one thing I wanted to say is you could start making cars in Australia again tomorrow. If the government came out, if Anthony Albanese came out and said, we're going to match Ford or Nissan or whoever's investment to $150 billion. Okay, sure, you could make it tomorrow, you could make the factories, but what I think we're talking about here is, can we recreate it in a sustainable and economic fashion?
Yeah.
And that's, I think, an important distinction.
Yeah.
And you think, yes, you can do it without it costing, untold sums of money. So I guess what could we build and how could we build it is to start.
So I've got some pretty sort of well-resolved ideas around how it could happen. And I think, to me, it's an evolutionary approach rather than a go in with all guns blazing approach. And so there are companies like ourselves and Walkinshaw and RMA that are doing secondary manufacturing already in Australia and doing it very successfully. And I think the Australian market is quite unique in that consumers have a relationship with their car. They're prepared to pay more if it's a car that's well suited to their needs. And we're a relatively wealthy country. So it's an attractive market for car makers. So back to my original point, if we take an evolutionary approach, you take the secondary manufacturing industry that we've created already, that makes money and employs people and pays taxes, and you expand that gradually into something that becomes manufacturing a full vehicle. Now, the really heavy capital investment that's required for making a vehicle is things like a body shop, a frame welding shop, a paint shop. Those things are very capital intensive. So, billions of dollars to set those up properly for volume production. Now, I don't think the market really supports that sustainably, given the competition is doing it very effectively in places like China and Thailand.
So that's the thing. The first question is going back to, Elizabeth and Broadmeadows, that's not necessarily what we're talking about.
We had a very protected market at those times. So in other words, there was 100,000 Falcons and 100,000 Commodores sold or Kingswood sold every year because the market was protected. And that's a deliberate strategy. It's fine, helping set the industry up in a protected way. But as those protections were eased, and again, for good reasons, because, in 1982, let's say, or even the late 80s, the cars that were being produced under that protected industry weren't the leaders in technology. So protectionism stifles innovation. Let's just say that's a fact. So it wasn't sustainable to keep the industry protected. So market was opened up. There was a thing called the Button Plan to try and help make the car companies more competitive with overseas. And it was hugely successful in many ways in that, by the end of Commodore production, Territory production, Falcon production, they were world-class vehicles being built and sold at profit with margin at a competitive cost. Now, we can go into that, but let's leave that aside for the moment. So I guess the market shows that you can do it, and the capability is here. So then, how do we bring that back in a way that suits everyone in Australia? Well, I'm saying we create this evolutionary approach where we start with something like a semi-knockdown or a complete knockdown vehicle, and then we build it up with some Australian content, with Australian innovation, and by Australian engineers who understand what the market really wants. And I think there's a market there for a unique product made for Australia.
Well, Australia's got a long history of that as well. I mean, Holden started, as a body manufacturer way back in the day, but then equally, like Volkswagens, maybe Renaults, came in like that. So they sort of came in a
Ramblers.
almost in a big Meccano set.
They did.
And they were put together here, which obviously helps the local economy. So that's the sort of thing you're talking about.
Yeah, it's history repeating itself is that evolutionary approach.
Let's take manufacturers out of it for obviously lots of different reasons.
Yep.
Car ABC.
Yep.
What would it sort of look like? Like what bits, how many bits come in, and what gets added here to Car ABC? Let's call it a Ute because it's a big Ute market.
I would say so.
Yeah.
I think the kind of the vehicle specification that's very popular here for good reason, because this is the way people need their cars to do the job for them, is a separate frame pickup truck and a separate frame SUV. Yep. The reality is our roads are vast, our country's vast, so the roads and cities are a long way apart. The roads we can't really afford to upkeep the roads to the standard, let's say, Germany or Japan, because we're so far apart. And there isn't access to vehicle charging points everywhere. So EVs alone don't make sense at the moment unless someone comes up with a revolutionary way to place chargers all around the country. So to me, it's taking a separate frame SUV and pickup truck and converting it to specs that are perfectly suited to the Australian customer, the majority of Australian customers, or a section of the Australian market. And I think you'd easily build a positive business case.
Okay, so is that taking, I guess, a thing like you do here, which is both engineering and some parts replacement?
Yep.
And then I suppose it's a step up from the likes of what GWM are starting to doing, where they don't necessarily replace the bits here, but they tune the bits here.
Correct.
So so it's, I guess, a step up from you, and maybe they go from that step to your step, which is obviously replacing some bits and having a workshop here, and then a manufacturing facility here, and then 2 years or 3 years, then they take that next step to then they can start replacing bits as well.
Correct. So the disadvantage of the secondary manufacturing model is you often have to discard parts that are fitted in the primary manufacturing source. So all I'm saying is bring those, you add more value here without discarding any parts. If you build up the content here, increase the amount of content that's fitted here or built up here, rather than importing something, taking it apart and putting it back together again.
Do you need the incentive for, back in the day there was, and it's happened all around the world, and they're talking about it again in the EU, obviously, certain, I guess, localization requirements. So is that sort of the only way to do it, is to sort of mandate that, whether it be 10, 20%?
See, I think I'm not a pro-tax person, and I think there's already a level of taxation in existence in the market that could just be relieved or relaxed given a certain amount of local content or local added value. So, things like NVES, luxury car tax, those sort of things can be scaled back to incentivize manufacturers to come here and set up here and do CKD, SKD type of work. I think that'd be enough incentive alone.
Yeah, okay. And then I think the second part...
Just one thing. Because what you lose, let's say in NVES or in luxury car tax, you'll gain in payroll tax.
Yes.
Because you're employing people here. Yeah, in highly skilled jobs. And Australia has got a really tragic history of productivity decline over the last 20 years, which is it's tragic. Yep. So this gives us a mechanism to bring that ourselves up in that productivity index again, which is a mature nation like this. It's awful to see that in decline.
Yeah, I guess on that point is that there's a lot more than just the cars. I mean, I was reading a piece from Mike Sinclair the other day on Auto Exec about recruitment. Yep. And obviously there's so many more car manufacturers in Australia now. They all need executives, they all need marketing people, they all need compliance people, they need homologation people, etc., etc. And the brain drain, I guess, why maybe I get your input in this, why maybe there's a certain time frame on that, is that through people like yourself, through people like Rob Tribbiani, that expertise still exists.
Yep.
That people that came out of Ford and Holden and Toyota and Mitsubishi and Nissan. But in 15, 20 years, they'll move into retirement and then there'll be that gap that won't be replaced. So I guess now is maybe potentially the last
Don't
opportunity.
say too late. Yeah.
Well, potentially the last opportunity.
We're getting to that point.
Yeah, we're sort of a generation
Yeah.
away from losing all that. And they also said that, the piece also said that what isn't necessarily talked about is Ford, Holden, Mitsubishi, Nissan, Toyota. They had big graduate programs for engineering, for marketing, for finance, and that are creating this, I guess, ecosystem of expertise and knowledge. So beyond the fact that obviously you will employ people and they will pay tax, so there's the financial bit, but there's also, I guess, it almost doesn't show up on a balance sheet, right? For the country. Yeah, the intangibles for the country.
Yep.
And I guess some of those people have gone in defence. Some of them are still now here.
Yep.
But there's the things that people maybe have thought we haven't realised we've lost in terms of creating that pathway for young people. I mean, have you seen that?
Totally. This is another thing that's kind of close to my heart and something that I put in the, developing tragedy sort of box, because when I was young person growing up, I was obsessed with cars. Totally obsessed with it. That's the thing I thought about most. And I see my nephews now, and to a lesser extent my nieces, unfortunately, but definitely my nephews, are obsessed with cars.
Yeah,
one of them's 2, and I've given him my nephew a Holy Grail to drive while his car's getting fixed. His son, who is my great nephew, totally obsessed, calls it a race car, will not get out of the car. You know what I mean? He's obsessed with it. There's something, just genetic about it. I had the opportunity to graduate from school and go into an automotive company, and all my dreams came true. You know, working at Toyota and Ford and ProDrive FPV and Premcar. This is me, getting to live my passion. Now, all those people who, if there's no car industry in 10 or 20 years, those people will be coming out of university with nowhere to go apart from overseas if they want to work in that industry.
And going overseas is then harder because there isn't because then they're competing with all the overseas people as well, and they go, well, what have you done?
No experience. Exactly.
Because let's talk about some of them, like people like the Mike Simcoes, Paul Battens,
Trevor Worthington, Ian Foston, all of these people who
Jack Nasser, he became chairman of BHP.
Correct. They've got into the biggest jobs in their industry in the world.
Yeah.
So there is, we've got a world-class education system, world-class health system. We've got, we're in the top 5 for longevity. It's an amazing country, and we should be leveraging that maturity of the country and giving people, highly skilled jobs. Our productivity is going backwards. Yeah. It's tragic.
And we
can't just keep digging holes in the ground.
And to put some realism around it. So, what's a roughly? Yeah. What's a viable volume? I mean, do you need to do 10,000 units or 50,000 units?
I think you'd probably make a business case. You'd definitely make one at 20.
Yep.
And so, one of the
I suppose it would depend if you're getting, say, a ladder frame Ute SUV where some of the the powertrain's probably the same.
Yep.
Front suspension's the same, maybe. The frames, so you're going to get economies of scale.
Yeah, you focus on the stuff that's tunable for the specific market. Now, and you spec it properly. You might not have the powertrain and the body that comes that makes sense in another market. You'd be a mix, and you'd have design differences, spec differences to make it specific for this country. There isn't one at the moment in the market that suits all the needs of the Australian consumers. The majority of the Australian consumers in that particular market. So my point is, one of my jobs in the past was working on the Ford Territory. Now, that business case was built around, I think, 25,000 units.
Right, and that's including building
Yeah.
the car here.
Correct.
Yeah.
And that had a lot of unique content. That had a whole body in white.
Yeah.
And unique rear suspension, unique front suspension, unique interior. There's a lot of content. Yeah. So that's a big investment for I think 20 to 25,000 units per annum.
Yeah.
And then they put a diesel engine
And not
in,
a
so they
particularly-
reinvested.
Not an expensive car, like
Not
realistic, yeah.
Correct. It was competitive with, even if you look at where it competed with its other vehicles from the brand globally, things like the Ford Explorer, it was more than competitive
Yeah.
in terms of real price.
Yeah.
And so, to me, that validates the fact we can do it again.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. And especially if we're talking about low capital expenditure up front.
Does I'm going slightly on a tangent, but does that open up more possibilities? For instance, if you're then putting it together, like for instance, if you need a bespoke powertrain,
Yep.
very difficult if you're going to get it made on the main production line. But if if the body in white's coming here, the engine's coming here,
Yeah.
the engine can come from another factory.
Correct.
Yeah, I mean, the ultimate example, I guess, is the HSVW1, which again was secondary stage manufacturing. But equally, they had the body, the engine came, and they put them together. So, okay, so well, that's a pretty good summation, I think, of what's
I think if
possible.
it was thought about very strategically, it could be very fruitful for a lot of people. And but we need to think about it strategically, and that involves lots of stakeholders, and including the government, to be honest. And the other point I've made recently is we are in a very Australians often misunderestimate their place in the world, and so, or underestimate, I should say. This market is a very attractive market to car makers.
why there's 70 of them here.
Yeah, correct. That's why they're all here. And so, and at the moment, it's completely open. One of the most open, if not the most open in the world. Now, why not try to get something out of that? It's may not always be like that. So we should be trying to leverage that. And, I think there's a way that it can be a win for everyone. So, I think it deserves more discussion and more thought.
Well, fantastic. And I mean, I think as someone who was peripherally involved with it, you were much more involved with it. But I think that as time goes on, you realise how much was lost, apart from obviously the wistfulness of, hey, we had cool V8s. But like we say, that behind the scenes, the brain drain, the lost opportunities for people coming out of university. So let us know in the comments what you think. And what do you think about Bernie's plans?
Be kind.
Be kind, yeah. Like and subscribe, and hopefully this can be a developing story. We'll see you next time.
Thanks, everyone. Thanks, Scotty.